Well, welcome to a special edition of Minot Talk here at the Dakotan. It's not Tuesday, it's not 2 p.m., but we're still going live right
What's
now.
going on?
Yeah, things are different. It's getting
It's-
close to our bedtimes,
it's
you
like-
know.
Getting dark out. I was
Yeah.
at work today.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. Well, some might call this work too,
I
but
mean,
that's all right.
This is fun though.
Yeah, this is fun. It's a good time. So we got a lot of exciting stuff. All budget focused today. If you have questions, please drop them in the comments throughout. If we can answer them, we will. If we can't, we'll help get the answer for them, because this is launching what we're calling our budget chronicles. And what we're doing is going to be breaking down the budget by department, just highlighting things, just so you can kind of take it in bite-sized chunks. Reading 168 pages is a lot of pages.
It gets intensive after a while.
It get or monotonous,
Yeah.
one way or the other.
That's
And-
a great way to
And so our goal is to make it very, very consumable.
Try to make it more convenient for you, the viewer, reader, to check out and get informed off of it.
Absolutely. And then provide commentary on it from the people that help form it. So we have scheduled an interview we'll be releasing in podcast form with city manager Harold Stewart. And then we are beginning to schedule out interviews with some of the council members. And, you know, I'm sure he's watching. I'm sure the mayor watches everything that we do. But we'll also be reaching out to Mayor Tom Ross. So at the end of the day,
I look forward to watching those.
yeah, there'll be a lot of viewpoints on the budget. It's a $28 million increase. And I think those are the things that get drawn out. And we're not going to jump into the talk yet. But it's interesting to see how that increase happens.
Yep.
And it's also interesting to take a look across the board. You have to understand something. The highest mill being charged in Minot is not the city.
Oh,
It's the school district.
sure. Okay, Minot Public Schools.
And we're upset about the city and where they're spending their money. But the school district has a mill that's higher than the city, a mill levy that's higher than the city, and that in the past hasn't even had a balanced budget.
Still are running under, still deficit spending as we speak.
So that's something that's really interesting to take a look at, that we will gloss over today. But as the Ward County budgets come in, which they have also, believe they may have approved their preliminary budget, or they're very close to it. And we'll be taking a look at all those other budgets that make up that full property. We might not look too far into the park district. Theirs is right around.
We will touch on it. We will mention it.
Yeah, you might see an article about it once. But first off, I think this is really interesting. And I'm gonna give a disclaimer right now.
Yeah.
As we've been getting going here today, we've had tech problems. So
Fingers crossed it'll all be okay.
yeah, hopefully everything works out. Can't see this real vibrantly, but this is something that city manager showed at his July 15th presentation that I think is really helpful, because
Great timeline.
it's a timeline of everything that is going on. And you realize that this whole process did not start when he presented a budget on July 15th, this preliminary 2025 budget. It started on April 1st. No joke, when things kicked off then.
And that's just when it officially started, let alone any unofficial planning that was already going on behind the scenes before that. That was just the kickoff date at that stage.
Yeah. So I think that's really important to realize that there's a lot of opportunity for. Also important to remember that, and I thought these dates were on there, but they're not. So let me pull up my calendar real fast. But it's important to remember that there's actually an opportunity for the public to engage. I believe it is August 15th and 16th.
So the first city council meeting it's the 1st and the 19th in August, and the dates that they have those meetings are that Friday before the 19th. I remember that.
It's the virtual budget sessions is going to be happening August 14th, 15th, and 16th. I believe it's going on the noon hour.
Yeah. Those will all be recorded sessions too, that if you by chance aren't able to attend, you can always watch and listen to later.
But they'll be virtual, so you can go into your break room, you can watch it, and you can ask questions live.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, if you're not able to watch it live, then you would be able to go and watch it post. So that's pretty cool. So this is something that's been going on for a while.
Big process. Clearly.
If you're not gonna be at the virtual session, the next big date would be August 19th. This is when the president, Mark Janser of the city council, will be giving some input on the budget. So that's something that's important going on at city council.
Yeah.
But I mean, for us, we feel like the next couple of weeks are going to be important, as we're going to be releasing interviews with some of those individuals.
We have interviews, articles. It's a whole bunch coming up from us here at the next few weeks of the Dakotan. It's going to be a fun time. And I really look forward to starting to deep dive on this. This is going to be a great conversation we have tonight. Appreciate everyone watching here. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, so I guess that's where we're at. Let's
let's we're here.
Dive in. So we've kind of talked about the timeline. I think something else that's important for us to remember is how in depth this process is.
Yep.
This is 168 pages. Kudos, shout out to city manager Harold Stewart on what he's put together, taking in the input of the city council members. Yeah, if I hit one of these buttons, it's gonna be a wah wah wah. So we won't use our pads for this. But shout out to Harold Stewart for that. It's a fantastic job. And maybe there's problems that we have. Maybe there's things we don't agree with or whatever. But
this is nothing I would ever even want to attempt to try.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
And the foresight that there's a lot of thought that's put into this.
Oh, without a doubt.
And second shout out goes to finance director David Lakeville. The guy like there's questions that get asked. And
he's coming up for every department.
Yeah, he's coming up for every department. And there are questions like, they're good questions. I'm not discrediting the question. But what is crazy to me is like, how do you know that off the top of your head?
Just like that. Like he is ready with it.
Why is this interest here? Why is this, that, and the other thing there?
And he's ready for it. Like those men have some incredible minds, and especially for this budget, they know it inside out. They have made it. They have put the pen to the paper, and like we watched on Tuesday night, they know what they're talking about.
Absolutely. So shout out to those, and then also I have to give a special shout out to the engagement director over there, Jennifer Clean. She hooked us up with some graphics that we needed.
Thank you, Jennifer.
So thank you very much for that. She is awesome. So if anybody deserves a pay raise, it's her. Give her 2 steps, whatever it is.
Make sure that market minimum is met.
At least let her set the bar for the area.
Exactly.
All right. So here we go. Let me, in my slides here, let's jump over. If we can make this happen, and maybe my slides won't work. Here we go.
There we go.
We don't want that one.
No, we tried.
It's all right. There's another one in here.
It works.
It'll get there. Maybe there's not another one in there. Maybe it didn't. Pardon me one moment. Basically, what we're going to show, and we'll grab this slide real fast. What we're going to show you is the breakdown of how the budget works across all the different departments that are, or not organizations, all the different organizations that are pitching in to make this work, to make this area run.
Because it's a lot, without a doubt. Just going off the meeting alone, there was they gave an opportunity for every department to come forth and be questioned. Whether the city council on Tuesday night chose to question a specific council, a lot they didn't, but sometimes, like the Minot municipal courts and judge, I mean, how many questions do you have for them? A lot of that's pretty cut and dry in the budget, I assume. But at the same time, it just shows you how much does truly go into it.
Absolutely. So here we go. So if you look at property tax, and this is there's some fine print down there, but you'll see for the 2024 property tax, you'll see that the largest taxing agency was the Minot Public Schools. The city of Minot was at their mill levy was 119.76. Minot Public Schools was like 139.69. Right in there.
The majority of that property tax dollars is because of the school board then, or the school department, school district. There
right. That's where they're the number 1, and then the city's number 2, and then Ward County is number 3, and then the Minot Parks is number 4. So I think that's interesting. It's also interesting, and this is how the city generates revenue. It's interesting to look at the sales tax, which we did kind of take a gander at that on Tuesday. But you get to see those pennies, those 2 pennies that are being charged for sales tax. You get to see where all that is actually immediately applied.
Yep.
Um,
Really nice breakdown, frankly.
and so what happens with some of those dollars, and this is important for us to understand as we look at the budget, what happens with some of those dollars is they literally go into a reserve. And you see this a lot with like the NOS, and you see this with some of the flood control. It goes into this reserve. And then when it's time to spend it, the reserves get spent, and we go this year we're spending $40 million plus in reserve money.
Yep.
But that money was put in reserves
Because-
anticipating it to be spent.
Yeah. So it's one of those, you see that number and it looks outrageous and it's an eye-popping number, but reality behind it, you have a lot of planning that went into this number came here for a reason. We didn't just say, hey, we're going to take $20 million out of our reserves and spend it on XYZ. That money ended up going into the reserve to build up for these specific projects.
And so we're about to transition again, and so I'll go and I'll give Lee Snyder's question. Since the Chamber EDC was endorsing almost every TIF for Epic on their project, should the board of directors for the Chamber EDC be asked if they are or not invested in an Epic? If their plan was to financially benefit from tax increases on other citizens and tax cuts for Epic, I think disclosure and transparency would be good. I think the number one thing that I'm a fan of personally is just transparency in general.
Yeah, period.
I have no idea if they are or not. I don't know anything like that. And I'm not ready to step out on that ledge and say it was that way. I think that when it comes to when you're serving in a public area like that where it affects the public, and it may be perceived that you have some control over how things are done, I think it is good for transparency. And you see city council members, and that's where we want to focus the majority of our time on the city council today, but you see a lot of times them when it comes up that they at least state what their interest is, even though sometimes the public doesn't always feel like it's fairly stated or whatever. But
or it's the everything,
full story.
Yeah, the whole truth. But at the same time, you got to be careful with it too.
Yeah. So I think transparency is always
100%.
a good thing.
I think it would be fair to propose to them, but at the same time, would the city council do that, or would that be us at that point?
Well, I think that's where we got to go interview all the board members.
Yeah, I suppose. Well,
that's
September's plan then.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. So what I want to kick it off is kind of going through the funds that the city has, and we're going to go straight to the budget, which you're able to go to the city's website. If you just probably Google it, you'd be able to find it.
Yeah, Minot 2025. Minot ND 2025 budget. I guarantee it'll come up.
And you can go through and kind of do this, but it's kind of interesting to see all the different funds that we have. So we have the general fund. General fund is the government's primary operating fund. It accounts for all the financial resources of the general government. City takes a conservative approach in estimating revenues for the budget. Funding of the city's general fund operation is derived from major revenue categories, including property taxes. And that's what everybody gets worried about. But there's also other revenue sources that come, licenses and permits, intergovernmental things, charges for services, fines, forfeitures, and transfers. So that's an interesting thing. There are 3 main functions that the general fund does cover: general government, public safety, highway and streets.
Pretty basic. Pretty self-explanatory.
Then there's an enterprise fund. As an enterprise fund is a self-supporting proprietary fund that sells goods and services to the public for a fee. The enterprise funds, I can't talk today, so I apologize, for the city of Minot include the following: airport, cemetery, parking authority, sanitation, water, sewer, storm sewer, and parking ramps. So only 2 enterprise funds, airport and cemetery, are subsidized by minimal property tax levy for the city.
So theoretically, your enterprise entities are places that could theoretically be self-sufficient and sustained on their own.
And an interesting part about the enterprise funds is that up to 20% of revenues from utility funds to the general is permitted to be transferred to the general fund to cover the city's administrative costs in providing water and sewer services.
And I know they can definitely have some like I know the 20% is the cap, but I know they have some playroom to work back and forth
Yeah.
between the funds on how they want to transfer that around.
Right. And so the recommendation for the 2025 proposed budget was a transfer of 7.32% in 2024. It was 8.77%. There's also a special revenue fund. Special revenue funds are established to account for specific revenue sources that are legally restricted to expenditures for specified purposes. These include public transportation, library, NOS, biota plant, flood control maintenance, emergency fund, Central Dakota Metropolitan Planning Organization, community development, block grant, entitlement, and sales tax. A lot of big words.
Yeah.
Revenues are generated primarily
Mouthful
from
there.
sales tax, property tax, grant funds, fines, and forfeitures, which is something else that's important to remember as you go to the budget. And you saw this come up a lot at City Council. Well, why are we spending this much money here? Well, it's because it's covered by a grant.
Yeah.
So we have a 200 and some $1 million budget, and I guess maybe we should have the percentage. I don't know what the percentage is, but I promise you this: we're only using 40,000 or $40 million in reserves.
Mhm.
A lot of money, but we've already went over that. Where
Grand scheme.
there's $28 million in property taxes being charged.
Yep.
You're going to have some of your fees and forfeitures, and then you're going to have a ton of grant money in there.
Yep. And that's where it all that and so much of those grant money, and they have to budget it as if we're paying for it, just on the outside chance that something weren't to happen with the grant, just because a lot of these things are things that are essential and things we need. But so you have these items budgeted in, but by the time the fiscal year's over, more often than not, those grants are fully repaid to the city, so it's a net wash.
You saw that happen with the recent Kemper property, where they went in there. The city's going to pay the $920,000 for the property, and then a large percent of that will eventually be received back in grant money. So very interesting to showcase the different funds that are happening, how those funds are created. And so I want to kick it off because I feel like a lot of times the whatever or around the budget is negative. I want to kick it off with some immediate wins. First off, in the 2025 budget, the mill levy is going to decrease.
Yeah, that's a guarantee at this point. It will
It's
be
guaranteed.
will be lower than last year.
Last year is 119 and some change. This year it's 115 and some change
Yep.
in with the mill levy. So that is
That's a
something
plus.
that Harold Stewart, City Manager Harold Stewart, said in his state at this State of the City address. Said we're going to go and lower property taxes. It's going to happen, at least in the city side.
Mhm.
And he came through on that promise. He lowered the mill levy, and they asked for, and we talked about this on our Tuesday cast. So if you have questions about that, you can go and watch that one. But they went and the amount of money that they asked for the property taxes was the same amount that they asked for in 2024.
Yep.
Which means a decrease because property values increase. And some of those, and so some people built new houses, or there's new whatever buildings that are built.
Mhm.
So it actually ends up being a decrease, like around $20 per $100,000 value on
Yeah.
your property.
Yeah, so it ends up being, I mean, grand scheme, $20 isn't a huge deal, but also at the same time, it's a heck of a lot more than like $2.
Yeah, but what was happening, it's not even about the $2,
Mhm.
because what was happening was you were getting a $20 increase,
Yeah, exactly.
and it was being said $20 increase isn't that much money. Well, this time you got a $20 decrease.
Exactly.
So that's something. I mean,
That's money going back into your pocket at
right.
this point.
And in some ways, you could look at that as a $40 savings,
Yeah, in a
because
sense.
there wasn't the $20 increase. Now that would be, maybe a little bit too far out there, but overall, something very, very great happened there.
Yeah, full anticipation for property values in Minot to continue to rise next year. But because of that, like Jonathan said, that whole mill rate gets canceled out. So that's why dollar amount's the same, but dollar amount you have to actually pay is lower.
The mill levy cannot increase. We already mentioned that, but I
Yep.
wanted to really reinforce this. So when they accept the preliminary budget, that means that they cannot go above it. And we saw that at the end of the meeting on Tuesday night, where one of the council members said, "Hey, let's go ahead. I feel like it's time to discuss what the pay plan should be."
Mhm.
And so let's go forward with the hybrid one and talk about this. I'm not sold on it, but let's at least talk about it.
Yeah, let's put it forth. And
it was put forth. There was a second. There was discussion, and the city manager Harold Stewart, another guy that's extremely knowledgeable. We gave Lakefield his due.
Genius.
Stuart the same. It's like, don't do that because you're going to decrease the levy mill by 2 points, 2 to 3 points.
Mhm.
And if you do that and accept it, we cannot increase the mill again. So if it comes out that we want to decrease that, it's 2.3 that's right now in the budget, and it could be decreased by 700,000 if it went to the hybrid.
Yep.
Essentially, that money still might be like, we could use it here though for this deal that we didn't fully fund. Take the Legacy City Hall that could turn into the new police station. There's
Exactly.
no money set aside for that right
Mhm.
now. Or in this budget, there was no money set aside. If we felt like it would be a good thing, if the city council and the city felt like that'd be a good thing, that extra money could be allotted to that. So there could be a savings built for when they're ready to invest multiple millions of dollars into that.
Yep. That way you start having that nest egg getting built for that specifically, rather than it just being in the general cash reserves, general
Right.
fund reserves. This way you're setting it aside specifically for this.
That may or may not happen, but the biggest deal to take away from that is the mill levy cannot increase. It's set.
Yep. It is locked in.
The max amount is set. It could go down.
Yeah, exactly. Could get lower depending on what the budget process goes forth with. If City Council President Mark Janser ends up bringing a proposed budget that's has a lot more cuts to it, it's a possibility. I don't know if it'll happen, but it could go down more. But for the guaranteed fact, it won't go up.
Anything is possible
You betcha.
at the Minot City Council.
Oh, always. And it's a lot of, it's fun. We'll go with that.
All right. So we actually went and
we pulled some clips.
we have a few clips and we're going to go through those. This first one is about the subject we were just talking about with the pay raise. There was really good discussion and there's some interesting points that were brought out from Councilman Fuller with his conversation with the HR director. So let's go ahead and play that
I know
for a while, but
Oops. Didn't get to see your faces.
we'll get this figured out here in a minute.
But yeah,
Just give
we're
me a
going to
second.
start off watching the clip from the HR department. That was the first department that kicked off the night on Tuesday.
for all of us to have a little bit better explanation of the differences in the proposed pay plans. I know we have a couple options. One is to give no
So this is
increases
Lisa
at all,
Olson,
and one was
Councilwoman
to
Lisa
have
Olson.
the step raises and the market raises, and then was a hybrid. Can you differentiate a little bit more for all of us
Certainly.
between those? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor and council, of course, the full raises are what they are. They would just be following the same process that we have in the past years. The proposal that the city manager and I both think is probably a fair proposal would be the hybrid proposal. And what that does is that essentially the biggest thing that we run into is we're doing salary surveys for the market. The hybrid proposal would assure that any changes in our grades or our salary ranges would go into effect for those groups that are being affected by that, while it would also maintain so that there is not any compression issues because those groups are moving equally. And then the few other individuals, which I believe there's only a handful, about 40 individuals, would still get a small nominal increase, which would be the step increase. So it would still guarantee that there would be some increases for those individuals as well. If you go with the other options, say just going with the market increase, it disenfranchises about 40 individuals who would not get anything at all. One group that I'm particularly concerned about, if you go that route, is that our dispatch group is not changing their grades. And so if there is just the market adjustment, that particular group would not get any increase. And we're having a difficulty in actually recruiting for those positions. If you go with just the step increases, then again, we're falling behind the market, which is the one thing we're trying to stay in line with, is having our salary grades at least comparable to other municipalities.
May I continue?
Continue.
So maybe I missed.
So we'll pause and we'll listen to
Keep going there in a second. But yeah, so she's describing the three different proposed pay plan structures that we could have going forth. The hybrid one, which is the preferred one. So you have two different sides of it. One, generally there's a step increase for tenured employees. After you've been in the position for so long, you get a set certain amount of percentage or dollar amount of a raise. But also on top of that, with the hybrid plan, that's a guaranteed thing. So everyone's going to get their raises when they're due. But if a specific position starts falling behind the market grade, so if position, just complete arbitrary made up numbers here, but if a position makes $50,000 and they keep making 50,000, but all the other cities that same in North Dakota, that same position's making $65,000, $70,000, all of a sudden they're behind the market grade. So that person would then get a bump up to whatever fair market assessment of that salary would be.
I guess the question I have based off the way that was explained by you is, do you understand it to be something where that's a going forward thing, where there's annually there's market grade adjustments being made, or is this a one-time catch up and then we would go back to our 17-step pay plan?
Know where you're going with that, but I think at least the way it's worded, it feels like it's a long-term plan.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as I think we'll get to shortly, I don't know how sustainable that would be, because all of a sudden then you start having people get raises left and right, but and you have them now get that market match, but they have the step increases as well. So maybe they're not going to get the market match the next year, but they still are set for their typical steps. So now all of a sudden they're making 10% over market, and that just continues to grow at that point. So there's a possibility for it to bloat further than it needs to.
Back to Lisa Olson.
Misunderstood this when city manager was explaining this at our last meeting. I understood that the employee would get the option, but really the decision would be made for them in that hybrid.
Correct. We're giving them the benefit of the better increase on the hybrid.
Okay.
And for most of the individuals, it is the market adjustment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for?
All right, so we're gonna have a question from Councilman Rob Fuller in a minute, but also got a text from him as well. They do a wage survey every 3 years to check market wages, so that kind of helps answer the question that I just asked.
Definitely.
But this next part of the conversation, so we kind of understand what's going on here with the pay period, or pay periods, the pay plans.
Mm-hmm.
This next question or conversation is really interesting for the future of the pay plans.
For the long-term viability of it.
For HR, Mike.
So just to continue that path.
Or sorry, I was one question off.
If we
I saw
choose
Rob
the
raising his hand.
hybrid model, as you guys have laid it out, does that, part of what we're trying to do is chase the market rates here. That's, we have a consultant that identifies that for us, and we're trying to go down that.
A consultant.
My assumption is if
Common
we don't
word.
go that route, we're going to lose ground faster than the full model. Is that right? Or actually, does that take care of the market side? I'm just trying to get it right in my head. Actually, that might be okay. Might keep
It would
us
take
closer.
the hybrid does take care of the market side of the equation. Because again, we are looking at the salary data for the actual range in the salaries. When you're looking at the market, the step increases are more of a cost of living adjustment that we have included in the actual annual pay plan.
Okay, and so those that wouldn't have the market adjustment that we're hitting with the hybrid plan, do we run some risk with them that they do lose ground to market over time?
No, because they weren't
That's the
they weren't
intent.
they weren't giving a market increase to begin with. So
Perfect.
All right.
You good, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
So now there's an interesting question.
Thank you. Lisa,
Councilman
we
Fuller
had
here.
a meeting earlier today, and I want to thank you and your department for sitting down with us because it helped greatly. One thing I wanted to talk about, and we talked about it in this meeting today, and I think this is important to bring up so people in the city realize, if we were to give the full raise increase that we're talking about this year, the City of Minot employees over the last 4 years, 22 through 24, 25 now, would have received $7,144,507
a lot of money.
in pay increases,
That's a
correct?
lot.
you are
That-
correct.
And that doesn't include their benefits package. So I
That is-
think
that is correct.
okay, I think what we estimated out was that's between a 35 and a 37% raise over 4 years for most of the employees in the city of Minot.
Yeah, I believe that is pretty close. Yes.
Do you believe that this is a sustainable way to give raises?
No, and I've identified that for the last 2 years that I don't believe that this plan is sustainable. And so moving ahead, when we hopefully do our salary survey next year, we're going to be looking at a structure survey as well.
Okay, and is any of this merit raised, or is it all just based on time with the city?
The city of Minot has never used a merit-based system.
Okay, thank you.
That last line
That's an
is
interesting
a
point.
very interesting line. The city of Minot has never used a merit-based system, and it's
So
a secondary. It's a rabbit hole that we found.
do you want the
Rabbit trail.
reactionary response
I
to
want,
that?
well, I guess we'll take yours.
Well, this is just the extreme takeoff of that.
Okay.
So she says, hey, these numbers are gonna not get maxed out, right? So, or these numbers can't
Are not
are not
sustainable.
sustainable. There we go.
Right.
Right terminology here. At what point, where was I going with this? Councilman Fuller made posed a great question.
Right.
And it's not probably a long-term sustainability thing.
Right.
And so how she mentioned they're going to start talking about that next year. So at that point, I think they have to try and figure something out that would be more long-term. And so something that would be more of that step-based kind of,
Well, right. This step, but you're talking about merit-based, right?
excuse me, merit-based. Yes. Which could be good because
You
so
think
you're-
that's what she's saying?
I think it could be, but
I think that's going to have to come from
City
either a
council.
consultant that says it's the way or city council.
is going to have to, that's probably a fair
The
point.
direction has to come there. And I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that she's brought up I don't know that she's brought up, but she has
At least
said the last 2 years
Mhm.
that this is not sustainable.
Yeah, she's concurred that she doesn't think this is a long-term plan.
It's not that she's concurred, it's that she has said
Yeah, exactly. She
It's-
has
this is-
stated it.
this is not something that's being brought up annually. It's something that she is stating. She's the one bringing it up. It's the way that she portrays it in her statement. That's really interesting.
So anyways, back to my point. I lost my train of thought there a second ago. So you have the merit-based system potentially versus ours, which is just tenure step-based, I believe. So the worst case
tenure. So basically you get more money just because you work at the
Yes,
city
so
longer.
that's where I was going with the worst case scenario kind of argument here. You have people that are all of a sudden becoming lackadaisical in their job. I'm not saying this is a thing, but the potential for it is potentially there. You get people that become lackadaisical in their jobs, get complacent, and then you have versus the merit based. And the only way they're going to lose their position is if they mess up fairly largely. Versus the merit based system, you might not get those raises as often as you do, but theoretically, based on that merit system, those could be more substantial raises at that point.
And it's important to note, Councilwoman Lisa Olson said there was a clarification sent out the following days. City employees have received about 21%, down from that 37%. They've received 21% in raises over the past 3 years.
Mhm.
37% was due to hiring more employees. And she says it's incredible, rare to see merit pay in public service. And so,
So the
those are
likelihood of-
good. Those are good things to know.
So the likelihood of it even happening is probably bare minimum. If it's not like it's not impossible, but the viability of it isn't likely.
You
at
want to
that
know,
stage.
and this is a side note. One of the most awkward things is
What's that?
if you're a city employee,
Yeah.
because you get to. There's not. I mean, there are those upper department meetings that happen, but you get to go Tuesday night and be like, all right, what's going to happen for my pay raise? How is that? That's got to be so weird.
And that's got to be such a conflicting thing too, because you want to argue for the best thing
Right.
for
Yeah.
your-
The $2.3
for your
million
business.
plan. That would be the best
But
for the city
at the s-
employee.
exactly. But at the same time, you have to consider yourself too. I mean, that's one of those situations. It's so hard to be unbiased, like with anything we do.
Yeah,
It's so
well-
hard to be unbiased in something of that nature.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Completely. I
So-
mean, obviously you can put it aside, but
That's a fun side note. But yeah, I get the merit being rare, and because consultants had been in, I didn't research that matter specifically. I figured that there was potential that it was rare, but it's still an interesting structure where with the guarantee over the just based off your years of service. And there's something to be said for that. There's also value in that when you get good people
Oh.
and they're rewarded for being part of that organization.
time brings experience.
So there's throwing those two systems against each other,
Mhm.
but definitely interesting there, as that's one of the biggest budget items besides the millions of dollars that is going to be put into flood control and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest items of increase that is brought on this proposed budget, and that's why it gets so much attention.
Yeah, and it's not only talked about in the HR portion of this, it also gets talked about during the finance portion of
Going
it.
to call something else out. Finance director, or not finance director, HR director mentioned a consultant, and we hear this a lot. And there's going to be a couple of clips that we're going to play later that will talk about it more. And so I just want to go and throw that out there, not throwing any stones at consultants or anything like that, but just want to throw that out there.
Consultants become a topic, a frequent topic in this meeting.
Absolutely. So, Interesting stuff there with the HR. You got anything to add before we switch departments?
It was a lot. They brought forth a lot of good questions to I know her name's Lisa. I can't think of her last name. The HR director. She did great, and she also ended up coming up later on to speak for other departments. She
Yep.
did a great job. But I think the the city council did a fair job at, I don't want to say interrogating, that sounds aggressive, but questioning her and getting the best answer for why she wants to spend what she wants to spend where.
Something that it became evident, I think for the most part, is the city has done a good job of finding good people.
Yeah.
And so kudos to that. That's not, I don't know if you can go and put that on one person. That's a team game right there.
That's true. That is.
They've done a good job of finding good people.
From everything I can tell, the city of Minot has some phenomenal staff.
So, for sure in the director's spots, because that's where we get to see it the most, and I'm sure across the board completely. So let's jump to I want to jump to police.
Go to the
All
police
right.
department, talk about that a little bit.
There's an interesting thing, and there was some good conversation, and we have a long clip for this one.
We might
because there
pause,
was a few-
talk over, otherwise we might let it play. We'll see how it goes.
There was a few things that we wanted to include in it. But one of the things that's interesting, and this was talked about in some of the conversations we had with council candidates leading up before they were officially council members in across the board with the council candidates. And that was the police is severely lacking in employees. There's 14 open spots that are authorized.
15 now.
It's
Chief John Klug just announced that on Tuesday that it is 15
he did
now. Yep.
He did. And so there's 14 that has turned into 15, and so then 8, now 9 are included in the budget because the one that would be stepping down should be included as well. So want to go and play a clip.
Yeah.
Um,
Listen to the city council talk to Chief of Police John Klug. I know Dave Lakefield also comes up and talks about some specific points here as well.
Is here.
Dave.
That's the thing.
Councilwoman
it's
Lisa
a
Olson
question for
starting off
both
here.
The chief and Dave. So we're, looking at this, we would authorize all of the police department positions. Historically, those positions have not been filled, but, in best case scenario, there's a lot of officers who want to work at the Minot PD. Where are we going to draw the funds from?
Mayor Ross, Alderwoman Olson, there would be an example of the most likely source would be general fund cash reserves.
And what is that amount if we were able to fill all of those positions?
I think it was 500.
That was going to be my
524,280.
About 500,000.
Okay, thank you.
so this is a really interesting conversation.
And to follow up on Alderwoman Olson's question, so in the year 2025, theoretically, if we filled all positions, we would dip into reserves for that $500,000. But then in the 2026 budget, we'd either have to find revenues or expenditure cuts to permanently build that expense into our budgets going forward, because it would not be my recommendation that we continue to reserves to pay $500,000 of operational costs of the police department. You'd have to identify a permanent revenue source or cut permanent expenses to make room for that in future budgets.
So there's more to play on this clip because they're going to talk about those reserves a little bit more, but it is the downside maybe of going the route of having more spots authorized than that are included in the budget.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think everybody sitting at the council would be mostly with consensus that not all 14 spots will be filled in 2025. It would.
The odds are not in our favor.
And that's based off history.
Yep.
It's not just trying to fill 15 positions, I guess, but it's history says it's not going to happen. It hasn't happened. It won't happen.
Yeah, historically, the Minot Police Department being 100% staffed isn't a frequent thing.
So, but if it was to happen, where does that money come from? Reserves. And then if it did happen this year, then what about next year? Because now we've cut it out of the budget and we still increased our budget.
Yep.
And we'll get to that.
And Harold Stewart makes a great point with that, because it would be easy theoretically to get those positions hired for this year, but then the following years when they have to build that extra $500,000 into budget consistently, that's where the real trouble would come into.
Absolutely.
And not like they couldn't do it by any means, but that's just where the questions would arise.
But it created a really interesting conversation that then is spurred on. I believe it starts right here, right away.
Any other question? Oh, go ahead, Scott.
So if I remember correctly in past budgets, when we talked about if the funds weren't used for those police officers, it went into an account? Or basically a cash reserve, so we might have 3 years that we have cash reserves for police officers?
Mayor Ross, Alderman Samuelson, those unspent general funds would go to general fund cash balance. So that is our general fund cash reserves that we're talking about. So that money, with general fund, it's exactly the way the name sounds. It's general government fund. So that money would stay in that fund unless it's transferred out for some other purpose.
So that's part of where the reserves have come from.
Mr. Mayor Ross and Alderman Samuelson, that's correct. That is a portion of it.
I've got Alderman Pittner is on the line and has.
So before we go to Alderman Pittner, and he's bringing up this money is in reserves. We're paying money out of reserves to cover these salaries, but also let's understand for a moment that money, some of the money in reserves was put there because we didn't have a full police staff.
Yep.
So we're literally using the money that was put in reserves because not having police to pay for the police staff salary, not the end of the world, is where he's coming from.
That's the basis of that point.
So important to note, Paul Pittner was not at the council, but he was joining in
via phone call.
So
He was present for the whole thing, just not physically.
So he had a question.
There's a question. Paul?
Thank you, Mayor. Just for the chief, above and beyond the 14 vacant positions, what do you know as far as retirements or transfers? Is there anything on the horizon that you know within your department of upcoming openings or vacancies?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, we now have 15 openings.
There's your big announcement.
I think we're going to have 4 offers that we'll make. And that's the complicated part is it's kind of the ever-changing world of employees right now for the PD. Nothing as far as retirements. I'm not aware of any in 2025. 2026 is a pretty heavy year for a number of people who will be eligible for retirement.
Want to pause it there real fast?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's a point there that I mean, it's not a huge question that could be followed up on, but I'm very interested to know what that projected number of retirements could look like in 2026. So all of a sudden we could go from being short. I mean, obviously we expect people to be hired in the next year and a half without a question, but say you only have like 2-3 new hires, and then all of a sudden you go from being 10-12 positions short to all of a sudden you have 5-6 retirements. Now you're sitting at 15 to 20 all of a sudden.
Right.
And it's just there's potential there, but it's one of those so nuanced questions that it's where do you really tackle it from?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because you would anticipate and there's studies that have been done, I'm sure, or consultants that have been brought in to try to figure this out. A lot of time I'm sure has been invested into it, but we live with the air base. There's people that are somewhat qualified.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably more training that they need and stuff like that because it's more specialized. But and we get it. A lot of them that are involved in police probably are very young in their career, so they probably move out or whatever. But it is interesting that is the one area. There's probably others that struggle, but that seems like a really key area where it's like, man, we're always struggling to find.
And yeah, I was going to say so consistently so too.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing. Maybe that's a question we'll be able to ask some of the city council members as we interview them about the budget over the next couple of weeks.
Mike?
So maybe just one comment more than anything. One of the, to your point, Harold, if we were in the fortunate situation where we're able to hire the staff that we'd like to and to put on the streets, a big part of the general fund reserves that we sit on today came from this concept. So if we've built up $3.5 million by sort of overfunding police staffing for the last few years, I can't imagine a more perfect way to spend it. So if that allowed us to draw that down, that would make perfect sense to me. That's not a long-term plan. We would work our way back towards that, but I'd love to see that actually.
And that kind of goes to the point that we were trying to make earlier, and that's why we kept this part of the clip in, because it's using the money what it was originally intended for, and that's an interesting thing. And this is just good discussion to have.
Yep.
When you're talking about city budget, like your budget, you hope you have millions of dollars in reserves, and that'd be dramatic for your budget, for your expenses. That'd be very dramatic.
Yep.
Some would say you were rich or wealthy, right?
Exactly. It's crazy how that works out.
But for the city, they need to have the reserves. That is a good thing. And in some ways, some would say we're blessed because we do have reserves, and
the majority of our departments have the preferred amount of reserves too.
Right. So that's a good thing. But when you're the city, you have to balance the line of how much do we take for the reserves, how much do we charge in property taxes or in other fees, and how much do we not? Where's that balance? Where's that fine line? And that's a hard line to walk as a council member, when you're going through and creating budgets and voting on that and giving input.
It's the whole because I don't like taxes, but if you give taxes back, it's hard to get those. If you give them the tax breaks to the constituents, it's hard to all of a sudden get those dollars back from that.
Right. When you increase it, then people feel that.
Exactly.
It's a
noticeable thing.
Yeah, you're definitely giving it back. They're not anticipating the increase in taxes the following year.
And on that same point, I know Councilman Blessum made a point. I don't know if it was during the PD portion of it or if it was a little earlier in the finance portion, but he was mentioning, hey, if I'm running a local, my own business, to a point you made earlier with your own thing, if I'm running a business, I want to have the most amount of reserves as I can. I'm making a profit. It's good for me. Yeah. But with the city, how much of those profits and good reserves are actually the people's money, and when do the people start getting that back?
Right.
And it's like we were saying, it's just such a tough balance to try to walk that line of taxation versus the necessities for our public.
And so you brought up Blessum. We'll go and unless, do you have anything more you want to add on the police?
I think that's pretty well covered. Unless, I think we're good on.
Fire was short and sweet, but there was an interesting conversation that I had, and this is where the thought of, man, it's got to be awkward to be a city employee, because there was a question I believe it was asked in
really there's nothing wrong with
pure
the building
intentions.
that's over there. I understand that we needed to
This is
expand and
further
things
back
like
than what
that,
we wanted.
but I think for what we expect our police to do and the facility that they have.
So that was also a very good conversation that was had.
Yeah, I guess just to recap that while you find our point, Scott Samuelson, Councilman Samuelson, was talking about when he did a tour of the police department and how it is lacking in quite a few areas from where it should be. He was mentioning, hey, we got this brand new great city hall. Why could something not have been done for our police department to have their facilities upgraded? When this happened, along those lines, I'm paraphrasing, of course, and summarizing, and then Councilwoman Lisa Olson replied back, well, obviously we all want that police department improved. But when this new city hall came, that was all from a grant program where it was included to just be the city hall. And I think, but it wasn't anything included for the main bulk of the PD police department.
Right. Great summary. I think I have my point. We'll hope for the best.
We'll see.
Hey, Chief, thanks for coming in. I only have one question. I see one line item here, 41,300, that has an 83% almost increase in overtime.
Okay.
What's that attributed to?
So there was I think two questions asked. Well, two council members engaged in conversation on this one. This first one was interesting because the fire is paid very uniquely.
Yeah, and they work such unique schedules too.
Yeah.
2 days on, 5 days off.
So they have to be paid uniquely.
Yep.
We get used to 40 hours, and then over that's overtime.
Mhm.
But that's because you're supposed to work a 40-hour week.
Yep.
So if you're going to be working a larger,
Their
we-
whole shift, their 2 days is 48 hours because they're open. They're
right.
there 48 whole hours, 2 straight days.
So fire
So
chief
we
explains
did an
that.
analysis. We changed our
did.
payroll system and the way we're paying our firefighters. They're paid, it's a very complex, they're paid on a 29/12 schedule, like a normal 40-hour employee like myself is a 20/80 in the year. Anything after 53 within a certain period of time, they can only be worked 53 hours a week. So what they do is they give them premium hours or overtime. So they are now paying them a little differently. They're paying them on 106 hours every 2 weeks. And so there's an automatic overtime of 14 hours.
So that makes sense,
for
right?
2 shifts.
Yeah, by all means.
And anything above
Yeah,
that
yeah, it
is
does.
automatically overtime. So I can go into it deeper with you maybe next week.
Yeah.
I can show it to you, but it's a very complex system. And we had an analysis done by an outside counsel on making sure that we are
All right. So I liked how she put it. Outside counsel, consultant.
Yeah.
covering FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, appropriately, and we are. So we are finally kind of correcting how we were paying our firefighters, which caused an increase over time.
Will that be a standard thing going forward then?
It will, and hiring more firefighters doesn't necessarily fix that.
Because of the
It's
weird
just,
schedules.
Yeah.
Kind of the cost of having firefighters. And
You'd have to
and
change the whole
according to
department
the law.
scheduling system at that point.
Thank you.
Mike?
One thing, just to continue on that, is
So this was an interesting
is there,
discussion.
just for my knowledge, is there something specific to the firefighter role or job in the law that requires us to pay them, first of all, as a non-exempt employee? Again, I'm not suggesting that we make them salaried and just say, look, you got to work every hour there ever was. But is there something specific structurally to how firefighters need to be paid? And I see Lisa maybe.
Yes, firefighters, the majority of them, especially the control staff, is a manual process or a manual job, and they are not allowed to be paid as an exemption. So we are required to follow the law with regard to overtime for them.
So interesting question.
Mhm.
And that's where I was like, man, you're a firefighter at home. No way. You're not making me salary.
You know your heart dropped for like a split second when that
Like, this is the one time I love HR.
like obviously Councilman Blesson wasn't advocating for that, but
He wasn't.
you know being a fireman at home, if you were watching that for that split second, your heart dropped.
Yeah. Like,
Because salary, you're on the clock all the time.
Yeah.
It is your ball game whenever you get that call.
right. So, but interesting discussion though with the
No,
how
yes.
firefighters are paid
Mhm.
and the unique deals and how much overtime is paid there.
Mhm.
That's a cost for the city right there.
That is,
And
it's a high cost.
You go and you look
It's
at
necessary, but
fire and police, their budgets combined are between 20 and 30 million.
Yep.
It just takes a lot of money for that. And then if you go and it's one of the first things that typically the presenters say when they talk about the budget is like, you go and you look at fire, you look at public safety, and you look at highways and roads, and like there's most of our budget right there.
that's
I mean,
90% of it almost.
I mean, you have the grants dollars and whatever that's just essentially passed through.
Yeah.
But there's so much that is just spent right there.
On
that-
those emergency services.
Believe it or not, council's not just frivolously spending in those areas for the most part.
Mhm.
There's probably discussion that could be had to drill down there, but overall, it's not happening. So moving on to engineering. Now, this was an interesting thing that came up. And I believe on one of our slides, we'll have it eventually where we'll show what the city presented as the areas that were getting increases. I believe there was $3 million increase
Yeah.
to
Their
the
budget.
streets
Yeah.
for the streets specifically. If we were to increase budget above that, the Lance Meyer,
Yep. City
Lance
engineer.
Meyer said that we would have to pay consultants, and we have 2 clips. We'll finally get into this consultant talk because we're going to bring some meat to that really help explain what the consultants actually mean when you see those lines in the
When
budget.
it actually gets itemized and broken down in a little bit here.
Real
Interesting
quick,
conversation here about the cities.
consultants. You guys have a 300% increase in consultants this year. What's going on that we need to hire a
God,
bunch
Councilman
of
Fuller with his
consultants?
percentages. He was good at those.
So some of that
Yeah,
is,
Brett.
let me
This
break
is-
that down for you.
This was my favorite part. This was almost my favorite part of the whole deal. He goes, he's like, give me one moment. and then he just goes,
And
man.
he's ready. He had to go
knew-
pull it
he-
out, but
Yeah, he knows his stuff. He was ready.
also I remember being there live, and this we're
For
still playing the video. It's
2025, we
awesome.
have $15,000 for Esri GIS support. A lot of that goes towards if we need something programmed. So our GIS staff is really good at making maps and is good at general GIS maintenance. But if there's something that needs to be programmed, they're not software engineers. So we have those dollars in there. If something code related breaks, we can reach out to them and they help us with that. So it's basically a service contract to help us out with that. City Work support is in there for 25,000. We're nearing the end of our life cycle on this version of the CityWorks software that we're on. We have to start prepping this year for a pretty big software upgrade in 2026. So we have some dollars in there for a consultant to help us start preparing what reports we're going to have to convert over, what software is going to have to be converted, some of the partner software that we have. This is a pretty big endeavor, so we're going to need some help, just manpower-wise, getting us to prepare for that. So there's some dollars in there for that. Every 2 years, we do NDDOT bridge inspections. We have $20,000 in there for our
Need one of
cost
those
share.
coming up soon.
So there's $20,000 for
Street?
that.
You betcha.
And then there's $60,000 in the budget for our every 5 years we fly the city for new aerial photography and LiDAR. The vendor that we use lets us spread that cost over a 3-year period, so that's year 1 of 3. Now, next year's budget, it'll be less than that because some of those costs will drop off. So that contracts line item that we have in engineering kind of ebbs and flows over the year, just depending on what some of those expenses happen to be.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I continue?
Continue.
Real quick, Harold, and that was very helpful, Lance. I mean, when you just see it on there as consultants and you have no idea what it is, it's it's concerning, I'll be honest, because last year we budgeted $1 million for consultants. This year we budgeted $1.5 million for consultants. And it seems to me that every time we have consultants come in, it costs us more money because they tell us we need to spend it this.
Seeing that with the
I like being
pay
able
raise
to hear
increases.
what we're
Yep.
actually using it for. Is that something we can get from each department as to what they're planning for?
This is an
consulting
interesting
year?
breakdown that's asked for.
We can get you a breakdown of the consulting funds across all departments and
Seems like a very
And
unexciting request.
more
though.
granular detail.
Seems like there might be a little work with that one.
But just going back to the campaign and all of it, consultants were something that was frequently brought up from the start. So
Right.
just
Yep.
just having a little bit of finality to it here with this, that just kind of brings it full circle at this point.
Right.
And just the knowledge that we are able to itemize it and break it down to such a point where, you see all these, like you said, it can be concerning to see the consultants just blank term and this large dollar figure next to it. Actually have the ability to break it down and see where that money's coming from helps.
Yeah, but all right, you're right. I'm gonna play this clip right
Mhm.
now. There's more that I want to talk about engineering, but this is the consultant talk again. Okay, and this is with the airport.
All right, sounds good. So the one thing, a couple things that I did want to ask with an airport, and this is maybe one specific to what Rob was just asking. Jennifer, what are the consultants that you're looking for during 25?
Interesting enough, the consultant line item is slightly different for the airport. We have an air service development consultant that we have on contract who provides us help with our lease agreements with our airlines, car rentals, and other businesses. But a bulk of that
So that's a
is
pure consultant.
actually our contract with Laz Parking. So Laz Parking is our management company that handles all of our parking, the revenue side of it, collecting the revenue for us and stuff. So as we make more in parking, that fee is a percentage of the contract depending on how much revenue we collect. So their fee back to us is put under that line item of consulting.
And that to me was interesting.
Yep. That the parking lot is operated not by the airport. It's a third party operator.
Right. Which we knew that.
Yeah. But that where their money comes from is put into the consultant category.
It's a consultant.
Yeah.
And so there's some, perhaps there is some too much being spent on consultants, but there some of those consultants probably should be, I don't know, perhaps identified as something else, because
I
it's
think-
not truly in the pure form of consultant. Like you have
especially with the latter part talking about the parking situation.
Yeah.
I don't, because that's something that's going to be there regardless. The airport's going to have its parking lots.
right.
I just, it feels you're going to budget that regardless. But I just, like you were kind of making the point, I think it would be good to find a more concise way to put that in the budget than as a consultant.
There's some of them that are pure consultants. Take the one,
The former, yeah.
well, the first one that she mentioned,
Exactly.
but that's a consultant you're probably not ever going to cut,
No, not at all.
because basically you have a consultant, but basically you have somebody that's an expert in lease management for the
Because every 4
airport.
or 5 years, your car rental agencies have to renew their leases and rebid on them.
Right.
And every same time period, your airlines all have to do it, and they all come due. So
Right.
it's a constantly revolving door. At that
Yeah,
point.
and you don't want me taking care of that.
I worked at a rental car company. I don't want to take care of that.
Yeah, right. You want somebody that's in the industry that knows things, and so
There's so much legal.
it's considered a consultant. But like that's the thing that I think when I hear consultants over and over are the ones that you're paying for an opinion.
Mhm.
Those are the ones. When you think of when I think of consultant, maybe not you, but when I think of consultant, that's what I think of.
Yep. You're paying to bring them in to give an opinion on a matter.
And while that's important, like it's good to have that expertise, because they're
In a small community, we can lack certain.
but even in a large,
specifications.
it don't
Yeah,
matter.
exactly.
You're looking for experts.
And there can be such niche things where there's only a handful of people that do this, anyways.
But I don't know. It is very, very interesting how all that works. So
Yeah, it all wraps
with the
around.
consultants,
You want me to go on a tangent and do a rant about the airport real fast, or you want
can
to?
you hold it?
Yeah, of course.
Because I want to finish something on
No,
engineering.
yes, please do.
16th Street. So in 2025, 16th Street South is going to be up for reconstruction.
So is that south of Burdick then?
I'm not sure exactly where, but it's going to be on 16th Street, which is a major artery.
Mhm.
And
Where's
there's
it?
another major artery that's shut down.
Right now.
And that's the 3rd Street Bridge. And it was actually Leigh Snyder that pointed this out. Like, how do we feel about both these arteries being shut down potentially at the same time? I'm not saying that the 16th Street needs to be held. You'd have to talk to Lance Meyer about that, because
there's a whole survey and inspection that has to go on, and
he knows what, well, for 3rd Street, but for 16th Street, I don't know what the state is for 16th Street. But that is going to be interesting next year around the difficulty. And it was interesting also about the questions about we're going to go and increase it up to 11 mil for our engineering budget for streets.
Yep.
How's that going to affect the citizens as they try to get around Minot? Are we going to be shutting down Minot if we spend $3 more million? And it was concluded that it'd probably help us get more into interior spots.
a lot more in depth into neighborhood, the heart of neighborhoods that need both road and
some
utility infrastructure replaced.
Yeah.
Like those big old corroding pipes underneath the streets, some of those would be getting replaced.
An interesting graph, I don't think I have it handy, but an interesting graph is the one where you see the amount of money spent on streets in like the last 10 years. There's been a major increase.
Yeah, how it was like 10 years ago, it was like maybe $2 million.
And that goes back to your conversation on Tuesday when you were like, what about this increase in
the very large mill jump that you saw in 2017-18?
Probably a lot of that had to do with streets.
There's a good chance, frankly.
Might have to get Wolski or former Mayor Sipma on to talk about that with us. Even you can ask Councilwoman Lisa Olson when she comes on.
You could
for our interview. So
it's confirmed. So there you go.
Leigh Snyder's clarifying 2025 is verdict for the 16th Street South.
Okay, fair.
So that's gonna be on time, and then 2028 is north of there.
Yeah, it's just gonna be interesting what happens with the 16th Street Bridge. I mean, if obviously, just to call it as I see it, worst case scenario, it doesn't reopen.
With the 3rd Street Bridge, yeah.
3rd Street, yes, yes, talking about 3rd Street, not 16th, east side of town, not west.
Yeah.
But yeah, it hasn't
That'd be
been
a
open
worst
since
case.
spring. It was supposed to be open before the fair. Then they obviously found some large cracks in it that were extremely concerning.
Not what you want to hear.
Not at all. Not over a main artery in
Yeah.
town. And now it's at the point where I vastly hope we don't have to rebuild it from scratch. But worst case scenario, that's what happens.
And it was interesting, the conversation that Lakefield had, Finance Director Lakefield had, about insurance.
Yep.
Because dude, the insurance world is messed up right now.
Yeah, right now especially, it is going through it.
Yeah, everything's increasing, and there's a lot of stuff that's becoming uninsurable.
Yep.
It's definitely going through it. And
Or even prior conversations from weeks ago when they were talking about the light poles getting hit in Broadway Burdick,
Yep.
those light intersections. When those get hit and you have to pull an insurance claim out on the driver, more often than not, the car insurance company has a maximum claim of $25,000.
Yeah.
So at that point, you have these $400,000 or $500,000 repairs, and you're only getting $25,000 for it. So you got to eat the rest of that.
which I think to the conversation that Lakefield was having when he was presenting, was they have insurance on the light pole.
Yep.
But now that insurance is getting harder to get.
Yep. Just because of the frequency of it.
And we're building up to, because of the frequency across the nation,
Just
though.
general, yes.
Not because of Minot.
Yeah.
It builds up to the bridge. Is that those are getting more difficult to insure as well. So interesting things there.
That is.
Subplots that really don't affect the budget.
No, yeah, just
Well, they do affect the budget.
Yeah,
They do
could
affect the
very
budget.
much so,
but
it also might not.
but
Just a little tangent we got off on right there.
So got one more clip. This was really, I've said it before every clip, so we'll keep it going.
We
it was really
obviously
interesting.
picked these clips for a reason. We hope you think they're as interesting as we do.
This one was about public transport.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's a new bus that might be on its way.
Potentially.
And I thought it was interesting, though, specifically about how it's paid for, how public transport works.
That was, yeah, I know what you're going to talk about with this, and it is
Just
an
real
interesting
quick, and
topic.
I don't know,
How the feds get
under
involved.
public transportation, page 151. So it looks like we're budgeting
Colin.
$1 million to buy a new hybrid diesel electric bus. Now, I guess my question on this, last year we made $68,000 on our public transit system. This year we're projecting we're going to make $75,000. I'm just wondering, breaking down the numbers, and I could be wrong, but I looked at them. It appears on our 8 routes, we have approximately 3 riders per bus per hour in a given day, if you divide the numbers out by what it costs to ride the bus versus what we made last year. Is this really we want to spend $1 million on a hybrid electric bus when we made $75,000 last year in revenue off our public transit? And other questions on top of it I'm going to have. What are the costs of the replacement batteries for this bus? Have we looked at that? What are the costs versus a standard, buying just a brand new diesel bus that would operate, like the other buses up here? Can our mechanic that we currently have to work on it work on the electric bus as well as the other buses? Or are we going to have to hire somebody new? Just general questions in the public transit thing, but that seems a little concerning to me.
I would say those are all great general questions, and we'll let Brian Horinka come up and answer that. I guess I'll defer to him, and I'll add if needed.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Fuller, those are all really good questions. When we're looking forward to things like that, one thing you have to look at, the income we're making is very inconsequential. A lot of transit systems are a no-fare system. About 60+% of our income comes from federal and state sources. We don't put a lot of money into transit from the local sources. When it comes to capital purchases, that's 85% reimbursed by federal services. The reason we're looking at the hybrid, and this is not a full electric bus, so it's not the type of bus where you would have a battery replacement after a number of years. This is a diesel electric hybrid. Right now, the way transit is going nationwide and the way the federal government is pushing, they're pushing toward low, no emissions services for transit. I am not prepared to go into a full electric bus right now. I don't think that's been explored enough here in our environment to go that route. But I do think that we maybe could start looking that direction by dipping our toes into the water with a hybrid type bus. The money for those buses are much easier to acquire. The way the federal government has set up the grants, it's almost a gimme to get 85% to go buy a hybrid bus. Much more competitive to buy a straight diesel bus right now because they're trying to phase those out. A straight diesel bus is probably about 650 to 700,000. Hybrid isn't at 900 to a million. Full electric's about 1.4. Our funding sources are changing as we move forward as an MPO and as a urban community. So we're going to see some shift in that as well. And as far as your
Minot reaching the 50,000
questions about our ridership, we
population
provided
platform.
80,000
We
rides
ain't there
last year.
officially.
And I know to some of the general public,
they're
it
qualified
appears
for
that
that.
we're not being used. But one thing you have to realize is the people that are using our buses are using it because they need it. We give them that freedom to stay at home. We give them the freedom to be able to go out and do things and live their lives without counting on other people. We're not in New York City. We're not LA. We're not going to bring in that kind of income. But what we do is extremely important to the community.
So it's interesting in a moment,
Mhm.
Councilman Fuller is going to bring it up about the federal funding, but it's interesting how it's way easier to get something that is a little bit electric, get funding for that from the federal government
Yep.
than if it's not.
Has no electric
And that
components, period.
that's kind of what we're looking at in this
And
conversation.
those that need it. That's why there's all those federal programs to help with that. And I think it would be a disservice to the community if we started to try to cut that.
And I agree. I'm not saying we cut it at all. I think it's an essential service. My questions were more with the limited amount of revenue that we do bring in, and I realize most of it is federally funded. Would we be better off maybe saying, hey, we're not going to charge anybody anything? Would we be able to get more funds from the Fed that way? And a second part of that question, with the reimbursement on the hybrid electric bus, you said it's about 85%. What are the hooks? Because the government always gives you a hook when you buy something through them.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Fuller, there really isn't a lot of hooks in that case, except for the fact that the government has an interest in that bus for the life of that bus, which in this case would be 15 years. So if something were to happen and the council would say, we're going to...
Okay, so he's going to go on and explain a few things.
Long story short, if we were to get rid of the buses before that 15 years, we'd have to reimburse the federal government
Right.
back a percentage of what was owed.
And then there's also things that they want to look into as far as having a no fare system to see if that would
You
be
could get more from
beneficial
the
for
feds
grant
that
money.
way, and
Because he said that the grant money is not based off of how much money or little bit of money you make. It's based off of how many people use the system. So if we went to a no fare system, would more people use the system, which then would qualify us for more grants. But the interesting part is the effects that city government feels from the federal government,
yeah,
which is a completely another conversation that again deserves its own time.
not just
potentially.
federal versus state, but federal versus municipality at that
Right.
point.
That we want to get rid of the diesel buses.
Mhm.
So if you want us to help get it,
Be at least a hybrid.
and I forget, do you know how much the bus it ranged from like high, like around 800,000 all the way up to fully electric being like 1.4 mil.
Yep.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and it's
That's-
an 85% match. So all of a sudden they're
Yeah.
putting a lot of money into that for you at
but
that stage.
right. And the point is like the city is not going to want to go and pay for that much of money out of pocket.
No, not at all. The city of Minot, I don't think, would ever do that on their own.
Right. And most cities wouldn't want to.
No, they're not, especially cities of this size. Like
Yep.
it's just not something that's viable for us.
Right. So that was a really interesting conversation that was there, just seeing that effect that federal has on these budgets. So we've kind of broke down a lot of the big talking points probably that came from that special council meeting that was held Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. We're on at 7. Feel free to go back, watch the full thing. We really did try to, it may not feel like it, but we really did try to include as many questions as possible from different members. So it was pretty balanced there.
We tried.
I do want to bring up one more slide that kind of brings us home.
Mhm.
And that's something that we've seen before, but we saw it again Tuesday night. And we get to see the dollar change. So there's 28 million just over $28 million increase in the budget. You see on the left side, the mills will be at 115.07, which is down from 119 and some change, as mentioned.
Yep.
The total amount requested is the same amount. Now let's look at the budget items that had the largest impact on the increase. Personnel costs. Okay, now there's a 2.3, potential 2.3, that's the top side of pay raises. The other 700,000 is from additional positions that
could be added.
That could be added, most likely will be added. There's a couple funds, and then you see the infrastructure. And we're talking about I believe it's a $20 million increase in reserves that are being used from. Or am I trying to compile here? What I'm trying to compile is probably most of the money that's being spent, most of the increase that's being spent is not the pay raise. That deal is it's a unique thing, and there's going to be a lot of discussion that's going to be had on that, and that's my asterisk that I'll put on this statement. But most of it, there's not that much increase in spending this year.
No.
And somebody probably is going to disagree with me on this, but that's the takeaway that I have.
Yep.
Not a ton of increase.
No.
But the question is, are we happy? And the answer can be yes. But I think the question is, looking at the budget over a 5-year term, over a period of time, are we trending in the right direction? Because the way that budgets work is when you start feeling the pain, it's the same way it works in your back.
Yep.
When you start feeling the pain in your back, it's too late.
Exactly. It's already been done.
Too late. The damage is done. And to fix it is going to be a lot of chiropractor visits, surgery, whatever it might be.
All of a sudden, your lower back hurts, and then you have me, a massage therapist, digging in your stomach. And
Yeah.
you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
What it's all
I
connected.
thought I told you it was my back. So the thing that city council has to be careful, and that the city needs to participate in, and let your thoughts be heard, and show up to these meetings and these virtual sessions. The city is trying to do its best of being as accessible as it can be. Maybe there'll be more areas that pop up for citizens to get out and talk for these things, but having a virtual session over lunch, you don't have to leave your office.
No, you can take your 15-minute break, go ask a question.
Right. You can engage. It's up to the citizens. It's up to us if we want to.
Yep.
We're trying. So make sure that you engage. But the point is, the things that we have to look at is with the budget is look at over the multi-year period, so that way we can pinpoint pains that might actually be coming up. And like right now, there's 2.3 potential 2.3. Most likely it won't be the full amount pay raise.
Yeah.
Okay. And this has been something that's been going on. And HR director says, I've said this is something that is not sustainable long term. We're gonna have to, and I'm sure that there's council members that have agreed with that, and that there's been discussion on that. But like that's something where, okay, we've got to figure out the solution. The notable thing left out, Legacy City Hall, not money being put towards that.
Yep.
Like, what are we going to do? That we need a solution for our fire police. I mean, we need a solution for our police. And is this part of the reason why we're not able to get more police officers, even though that they spend the majority of their time in the car? Is facilities part of the problem? There's money that's got to be spent on that potentially. So I might say that I think that the consensus is that it needs to be done. Don't know how, but it needs to be done. These are things that have to be figured out. And as you pointed out on Tuesday, like the preview for the 2026 budget was a $14 million deficit.
Exactly. Already looking at that, looking ahead at that.
I think they always start with the deficit.
More often than not. No, it's one of those, you want to start high and build it back down.
Right. But don't give it a grade, but give it an opinion. How do you feel like the process went? How obviously there's going to be some change. Is there any changes that you would like to see made?
I think, from my non-expert opinion, that they did a very good job with it. I think as of now, this is about as good as they can have for right now without really disrupting things. I would obviously love to see taxes lowered even more, but being pragmatic and realistic about it, I think where they're sitting right now is about as good as we could hope for, given the current circumstances.
What pay plan should they choose?
The hybrid one, on the contingency that it's not going to be a long-term thing.
Okay.
Like
So
maybe
like the
another-
1 point, it
maybe
was like
another-
1.7
Yeah,
mil, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Somewhere in there. Yeah. I think that's interesting.
I just think, yeah, it's one of those things that, you have it for another year or two in place, but then you start working towards a better long-term solution.
Yeah. But there's got to be, and obviously that was commented by Councilwoman Olson that merit based plans aren't typically the standard at city levels.
Yeah. I'm not
Councilman
saying that
Fuller,
would be the best way to do it, but just
but
something.
Councilman Fuller said, should we be a leader in this area? Is this something that we should look at? What's your opinion? Should it be merit based or should it be
Without knowing enough about the in-depth of it, I just strictly surface level, I think merit-based would be great to look at, because I know what I've seen what tenure can do to people, and it can lead to complacency. Not saying it does by any stretch, because like I mentioned earlier, tenure can also lead to experience, which is great.
right?
But just on the surface of it, I think it would be great to explore a merit-based system.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Maybe that's something we should research. Yeah, I think it was a great presentation. I think that there's some. So obviously the consultants are going to stand out because that was a question that came up often.
Yep.
It would be neat if some of that could be revised where it was more specifically labeled.
Yep.
Not out of request. A great example is the airport.
Yep.
That's parking. All right. So it's obvious that this is not a consultant.
Mm-hmm. Just from sheer surface level looking at it.
Yeah.
You can get down to
This isn't. Well, I feel like this isn't a consultant, and you don't feel like it is. It's like obviously no.
Yeah.
This is not a consultant.
Yeah.
You
You might consult with them, but they're not a consultant.
Yeah. So why don't we call our employees consultants?
No.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Tenure, and I think that was a misquote of tenure. Experience. Experience is what I think what you were meaning to
Yes,
say.
excuse me. Oh,
And that should be very clear. There's you don't get to work at the city for 20 years and then you can't be fired.
no, exactly. No, not by any means.
It's just experience. And either way, I think experience is rewarded. I don't know what the best plan is. That's where a consultant, the experience
that's
is
where
going
a good consultant would come in and
potentially
give us the best options theoretically.
But it would be nice, getting back to the point that I was making, it'd be nice to have some of those consultants labeled more specifically as to what they actually do.
Yeah.
Some of them are truly where everyone would agree, yes, that's a consultant. Some of them are like, yeah, this isn't really. And I think it would also, the city's been very transparent throughout the entire process. But it would bring more transparency to the budget. And I'm not saying that the city hasn't been transparent. They've answered every question. They have been very transparent. That's not what I'm not trying to create a rift there, but it'd be easier to dissect the budget and potentially find areas that need to be cut or I mean, obviously sometimes it needs to grow. I think we've seen the growth and now we're trying to rein it in. I think overall most would feel comfortable with that.
Without giving it a grade or a number, how about just pass fail?
Oh, that's hard. I mean, I think it passed, but that's hard.
That's I get it. I feel you with that. It's not necessarily a yes.
Would you be? I think the better question. That's probably not very nice to you, but the better question is: would you accept it as is,
Ooh.
or do you feel like there's some adjustments that need to be made? The easy way out is to say, yeah, there's adjustments.
Of course.
So if you say that, you're gonna have to at least name two adjustments.
That's what I'm trying to think. Like, I can't think of anything. Obviously, I don't know it in depth like our city councilman and the department heads.
Oh, they've had to spend a ton of time on this. Again,
we've spent about 2 weeks on it compared to their months on this at this point. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I think you could specifically improve.
Well, I mean, obviously, we're going to see a change with I think it's clear we're going to see a change with the pay. Like, it's not going to be the full amount there.
Yeah, something's going to happen with that, without a doubt.
Do you feel like there should have been? I don't know from where. Do you think there should have been money set aside for the fire or the police department this year? Yeah?
I think it would have. At this point, we're going back years now, but I think it would have.
No. I'm saying in this budget, should there be money
specifically? I think it would have been good, but at this point, where do you get it from? I think the best thing. So here's my non-professional opinion on this. I think the best thing could have been to have taken that 500 some thousand extra that you were going to budget towards the police officers, take that and just put it specifically aside for the police station. Obviously, that's not nearly enough for what you're going to need, but it's a start.
Okay, that's a good take, and I think some of that was cut out. I think there was an intentional cut out because of the strong push, right or wrong, for decrease in taxes.
Yeah,
that became the priority, and that became the priority back at the State of the City. Maybe there was some
this
people that were talking about running for council at that point. Maybe, I don't really remember. That was a long time ago. So that's just something that the city, that present city council was feeling, and at least the city manager was feeling. So I mean, kudos to Harold Stewart for finding a way to get a decent budget together without raising taxes, property taxes,
and including a tax break in it.
Yeah. Though I think the Legacy City Hall, that's something that's got to be addressed, and I think we can't push that down the road.
No, that's something that is going to need to be addressed sooner than later.
It would have been nice to see that included somehow. Again, what are you going to cut?
That's
and I think there's still a chance that it might be addressed.
It certainly could.
I think, and this is me going on the record, but I think there's a chance that the mill does not decrease. I think there's a chance the mill stays the same, but we gain, because I think that the hybrid pay plan is the one that's going to be accepted. So that's going to create that 700,000 that I've been talking about. And I think there could be a chance that some of that gets applied to that.
And some of that extra that you get from that ends up getting placed towards the Legacy City Hall.
I could be very wrong on that.
I mean, that's a shot in the dark. It's
because there may be something else that needs that money.
It's not pure speculation. It's at least informed speculation. I mean,
yeah,
by all means.
But I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened. I also wouldn't be surprised if they went lower the levy, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I could see a push for it, but yeah, I'm not sure if it'll end up happening at this stage. I think it's probably pretty set where it's at.
So very, very interesting stuff. Great job to city council members, to city manager, to all the department heads, to Mayor Tom Ross.
Fantastic job on this.
We're going to continue to break this down. Like I mentioned, we're going to go and have an article out on every single department. Very informative, just showing exactly what their budget looks like, where the money's going, and look at those increases. I say increases, they're pretty standard increases. There's nothing too much to write home about. We've already kind of identified those.
Most anything that jumps off the page, we've already talked about at some
so
point.
You can look forward to those. And then also we're kicking off interviews. We have some of them already scheduled, and we'll start releasing those next week of interviews with the city council members, city manager, people that have been involved in this process for a long time, so we can get their direct take and probably go and call us out on a few things, and that'll be great.
As they should.
I want to hear it
we
because
need to be held accountable too.
We want the transparency, and we want ultimately what's best for the city of Minot.
Oh, exactly.
Our goal here is just to create some good discussion so that way people can be more informed.
Try to help
be more engaged.
Yes, that's one of the big things, is try to get you, the viewer, engaged and knowledgeable about what's going on in Minot.
So be on the lookout for those things. Follow us on Facebook, like and subscribe on YouTube. Join the Dakota community where we'll keep you informed on those things. We also have some other pretty cool things that are going to be coming down so make sure you tune in this coming Tuesday. We'll be recapping the city council meeting that's happening this Monday
night.
Absolutely. And if you are a small business, we would love to interview you. So give us a shout out and we will reach out to you, either have you on our Minot Talk or do an article on you. Really want to do our part in helping support the small businesses in Minot. So please reach out to us.
Or if you have something on the budget you want us to cover specifically, reach out to us on that too. We'd love to make sure we have your question answered in one of our articles.
Absolutely. So thank you for watching this special edition where we launch our budget chronicles for the 2025 Minot City budget. we'll be tracking this through the Ward County, through Minot Public Schools, through the whole works. So be sure you stay tuned to the Dakota. Thank you. Have a great evening.